Okay, I'm going to call the conference to order. Just prior to the adjournment, we had the Chair of Standing Orders move Standing Orders Report number 3, and that report, as you may remember, recommended that the outstanding business in relation to finance and foreign affairs and trade would be taken first in this session. And the report was moved, but it wasn't seconded and it wasn't voted on. But it did seem to be non-contentious. But just to keep things right, is there a seconder for? We've loads of seconders. Is it agreed? Agreed. So now I'm going to call on Dublin Bay North Constituency Council to move motion number 46. Alison. And again, can I emphasise, please, that people would say their name and branch or constituency or whatever.
Councillor Alison Gilliland, Santry Kilmore Branch, Dublin Bay North, proposing motion 46. Colleagues, we have seen through our conference motions our extensive emphasis and commitment to fully resourced public, not outsourced, but public services such as childcare, education, supports for special needs and sláinte care, as well as sustainable housing where everybody can afford secure roof over their heads. We'll also later be committing to investment in a cleaner, greener environment and economy. We want to ensure as well that our citizens, particularly the most vulnerable, live within a threshold of decency when out of work, ill, disabled or retired. The one big question remaining for us is how are we going to fund what we aspire to? Where is the money going to come from? And this is the tenet of this motion. Looking at our current taxation and social insurance system, many people have bought into the myth that we are a high-tax country, that the more people removed from the so-called tax net, the better. Except when it comes to TD's salaries and allowance to the President, there is limited conversation with regard to why we actually pay tax, how it's invested or how it's redistributed. There's no tangible joining up of the dots between what we contribute and our public services and our welfare system. Neither is there a conversation about the effectiveness of special tax treatments as a means of incentivising the economy, or indeed tax loopholes that allow, for example, real estate investment trusts to pay very little tax on their profits from rent. Therefore, our taxation and social insurance system needs to be radically overhauled. And because of our intrinsic values of social justice, fairness and equality, we are the only party capable of challenging current thinking, capable of challenging current policy and capable of leading its reform. We need a system that affords a broader, more proportionate and transparent collection of taxation. We need to throw out the narrow two-band system with its tax credits and banded tax reliefs and introduce a more graduated or incremental banded system, starting with a small percentage payment and gradually increasing in line with earnings. I personally believe that everyone should contribute to our income tax system as a contribution to the public services we all benefit from, and that any tax reliefs should be offered at a flat rate and used to support sustainability. For these reasons, I think we should look more closely at the future of the USC. It's clear and transparent and leaves financial consultants nowhere to hide. This is vitally important if our citizens' contributions are to be fair, just, equal and transparent. We also need to look beyond tax on income from work to more effectively taxing all types of income and holdings. We have a generous corporation tax, but too many loopholes. So we need to ensure at the very least that corporations pay their full dues. On the other hand, we need to consider how we treat small domestic businesses, particularly in their start-up phase, so that this vital side of our economy is allowed to prosper and, in the long term, reduce our reliance on the sometimes volatile multinational sector. We also need to retain our local property tax. Not in its present form, it needs some of its rough edges smoothed out, but again, it needs to be linked to local council services. However, it's effective in that everyone pays and there are no loopholes. When it comes to our social insurance system, we need to discuss whether there should be a link between contributions paid in and contributions paid out, particularly with regard to unemployment benefit. Too often in the recession did we see workers lose well-paying jobs and very quickly get into mortgage distress due to the massive gap between their previous earnings and their state unemployment benefit. These are some opening or initial thoughts, and I've no doubt that at times in developing a new taxation and social insurance policy, we'll have many debates and many arguments. That should not deter us. It is absolutely essential that when we are asked the question about how we are going to fund our public services and social sustainability aspirations, that we stand proud and give them a comprehensive, well thought out, fair and just answer. Garmagov.
Thanks, Alison. Is there a seconder for the motion? Formally seconded, Tom. Thanks. Are you going to move?
Tom Cosgrave, Dublin Bay North, House Sutton branch. I'll keep this very brief, delegates, because my colleague, Councillor Gilliland, has outlined this in depth. I'll just say that taxation is investment in our society, in our communities. I think it's fair to say that some sectors of society do not pay their fair share of tax. Therefore, they are not making as full an investment as they should in our society and in our communities. So I think we need to really widen the tax bands, as Alison has said, and make sure that all sectors of society can see that other sectors of society are paying their fair share. So I'll leave it at that, and I'd ask you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. The mover of motion number 47 from Dublin West Constituency Council, John. And can I please emphasise that it's 3 minutes, everybody, not just you, John, everybody.
Thank you, Chair. I won't take that personally. John Walsh, Clonsella, Dublin West, proposing motion number 47. Colleagues, I suppose this is a straightforward motion, and it's about banks and bankers. And perhaps just a couple of examples of the current situation in terms of taxation and banks. And essentially, there isn't any. Last year, between Bank of Ireland, AIB and Permanent TSB, the three banks had combined profits of 2.5 billion, and yet they paid no tax whatsoever. AIB will not pay a cent in taxation for something like a 20-year period, despite making a half-yearly profit of over 800 million euro in the first half of last year. The CEO of AIB commented that AIB had a deferred tax asset of close to 3 billion, which is an impressive amount of money. The Department of Finance defended the current method of dealing with banks through the bank levy as a more appropriate method, rather than, as they said, messing with the tax system. But unfortunately, the current system is deeply unfair, and it messes with the interests of the taxpayer. It is a truism that banks benefited hugely from the bailout. They benefited from the support given by citizens and taxpayers throughout society. And it is right and fair now that they should pay their fair share in tax, preferably through a minimum effective tax, or failing that, through a doubling of the bank levy. And colleagues, we've also seen an extraordinary campaign by banking chief executives attempting to overturn the current cap of 500,000 per annum for senior bankers. Apparently, $500,000 is too miserly a sum to attract the right kind of talent to the banks. And this is being done at a time of continuing inequality in pay for teachers, guards and public servants. Colleagues, I think in the circumstances this campaign is simply obscene, and we should as a conference definitively reject it. And we will have an opportunity to do that with the emergency motion being taken tomorrow in relation to bankers' salaries. So delegates, I would commend the motion to you. It's crucial that banks pay their fair share in taxation. It's crucial in terms of tax justice, and also it's crucial for the credibility of the tax system, and that's what the Labour Party should stand for. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John. Is there a seconder for motion number 47? Formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. And motion number 48 now, in the name of Longford Westmeath Constituency Council. Deputy Willie Penrose.
This motion is intrinsically about Labour values, and it will be seconded by my colleague Lorraine Scally. It is about our economy escaping from being held to ransom by banks driven by an ethos of profit maximisation, and instead our communities having access to alternative financial services based on the common good. The concept of a public bank is poorly understood in an Irish context. A public bank is emphatically not a nationalised bank like AIB. A public banking model called Sparkus has existed in Germany for over 200 years. It will be municipally owned, not a nationalised bank. It will be not for profit and be restricted to lending to its own regional economy for its business. It would fill the gap left by the demise of business societies and serve enterprises formerly served by the SEC. And both the Post Office and the credit unions could earn additional income from selling public bank services across the county to branches, and it would provide a suitable vehicle for the European Investment Bank to lend funds to the SMEs. Not only would such an Irish community banking service provide a strong alternative ethos in the Irish financial services, it would free us from the dead hand of the pillar banks. In the past 2 years I have debated the need for this service with numerous ministers. I have warned them and pointed out to them that the dead hand of the pillar banks can be seen in the policy making of the Department of Finance mandarins and their bureaucrats. In July this year, the bureaucrats wrote an incoherent report for the government opposing investment in a public banking system on the grounds it might crowd out the existing pillar banks. But once again, as I discovered in the bankruptcy legislation, the finance mandarins and of course the political masters confused the pillar banks' interests with the national interests. In doing so, they jeopardise future generations and risk our society being held to ransom by shareholder-driven, profit-maximising banks who think nothing of the common good and are quite content to let the taxpayer continue to pay for the mistakes. We see this in their demands to remove the bankers' pay cap, where they drag their feet reluctantly before admitting to robbing customers over tracker mortgages, and yet they are still throwing family homes to the vulture funds. The industry response to these concerns is to set up the Banking Culture Board. I'd like to say this is laudable, but let's be honest, this is really putting lipstick on a pig. 10 years after the crash, Ireland is still vulnerable to being held to ransom by the big banks. The AIB has done this to us twice before, and they won't hesitate to do it again. The credit unions have made it clear that they don't want to become banks, but they do need strength, and we need to support their services. Without them, people will be lost. And an Irish public banking network would fill the gap between the big banks and the credit unions. So this will not only help to reshape our financial services to the real economy, but it's an issue of vital national security. Does this government have the political will to think not just of the next general election, but to act like statesmen and think of the next generation? I commend this motion to the conference.
Thank you, Willie. 2 minutes and 44 seconds that took. So that's leadership. Lorraine.
I am Lorraine Scally. I am from Cool, Mullingar, County Westmeath. I am local area representative with the Labour Party, and I'm standing in the next local elections. We are So, as Willie Penrose TD pointed out, we are calling for the establishment of a pilot public bank in the Midlands with a view to rolling it out as a network of community public banks across Ireland. We note again, as Willie has said, that the German public banks called Sparkus have been in existence for 200 years. They've been key to ensuring stable, consistent flow of credit to SMEs in Germany, and so we acknowledge that they would fill, as Willie has pointed out, the gap in the financial service providers for SMEs at present. This public bank, we would hope, would not be a nationalised bank. It wouldn't be for profit. It would focus on regional development projects and would put its surplus into those. It would obviously fill the gap by the demise of the building societies. We hope it would allow the post offices, the credit unions to earn additional income and to stay afloat. It would provide a suitable vehicle, we hope, to lend funds to the SMEs, and it would complement the existing Irish credit union movement, which is very important. We also again condemn the efforts by the bureaucrats in the Department of Finance to ignore the development of a pilot community bank. And so we urge the Labour Party that it campaigns vigorously to establish a network of community banks to strengthen our credit unions, especially our rural post offices, and to support our struggling SMEs and regional development. Garmila Mahoy.
Thank you, Lorraine. So now, motions number 46, 47 and 48 are properly before conference. Speakers, John, you wanted to speak on 48. Any other speakers offering, will they please come up to the front?
John Feely, Leitrim, Sligo Leitrim. Now, this is a difficult one for me, Chair, because I'm going to request the referral back of this motion on setting up a bank. And the reason I give at this point in time is, well, first of all, the proposal, and I compliment Willie on pushing this. I attended a function in Mullingar Credit Union where the case was made with the help from the members from the Sparkazan Bank. But where I see it is, I'm very active in the credit union movement, by the way, as well. So I see this model, as currently proposed, is really coming from on high, and I believe it should come from below. And the way I think it should be built via the credit union movement. We already have very weak banks. We have the permanent TSB is just almost gone. We have a state bank in AIB of 70%. And I must, just a bit of a warning, not all is not well with the Sparkassen model in Germany. I hate to have to say this because I admire a 200-year-old movement, but there's one, a retail unit of the Sparkassen, they're called Landesbanks. There's one, a very big one, with 160 billion of assets, 90% of Ireland's GNI, in trouble at this point in time. And it's either going to have to be bailed up by its owners, who are the state government, or the local Sparkassen, which owns 33% of it. Another option is it may have to merge with another Landesbank. So I don't want to, I'm not against the motion, but I would just prefer that it refer back and that we then study this in some more detail. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Is there a seconder for the reference back? Seconded? Seconded. Okay. So, any further speakers now on motions 46, 47 and 48? No further speakers. I invite Deputy Joan Burton to respond to the debate. Joan.
Well, thank you all for being here today and here this afternoon. First of all, I want to say that Willie has a point when he says that it appears that officials in the Department of Finance are extremely reluctant to support local banking, be that credit unions, post offices, or indeed the Sparkassen model. And I actually think that rural Ireland does need community banking, and that should be in conjunction with both the credit union movement and indeed with the post office. The same gentlemen, though, and by the way, they're mostly gentlemen in the Department of Finance and DPER, any time I meet them. The same gentlemen, by the way, are much more into lifting the cap on bankers' salaries. Now, the bankers who are affected by the cap on their salaries are the bankers who were at the top of the banks and in senior executive positions from the time of the crash onwards. They earn a cool $500,000 a year. And I think, in the language of anybody in this room, someone who is privileged to earn $500,000 a year, plus benefits, other benefits, really, I don't think until they have paid back all of the money, the 65 billion or so, that the Irish public put into the banks, and which caused so much grief to so many individuals and families, until they've actually cleared that debt and they've actually started paying tax again. So, you know, it is puzzling as to why in the world of the Department of Finance there is really one law in terms of community banking for rural areas like Longford and Westmeath and places that Lorraine is hoping to represent come the next local elections. But there's another one for those people who are lucky enough and privileged enough to earn $500,000. And I think, you know, on that basis, we should support the motion from Longford Westmeath in relation to community banking. We had a very moving session here an hour ago, a couple of hours ago, in terms of meeting Vicky Phelan and Stephen Teep. And really that was about healthcare and the quality of healthcare in this country and access to it at the point of need. We discuss that in this party. What we don't discuss often enough is the funding. And what I proposed in the context of the current budget, and I'm delighted to support the motion from Dublin Bay North, is the idea that the universal social charge, which was further reduced in this budget, that we should actually hold on to it and we should convert it to a universal health payment, so that when we talk about Sláinte Care, and Jerry Burke and the other people who are on the platform today know that to implement Sláinte Care you need a fund of money. Now, we would have, in what remains of the universal social charge, if we convert it to a universal health charge, we would have funding that would help to get Sláinte Care off the ground, and the funding element in the USC is significant, so we could also ensure that a proportion of that goes, for instance, to mental health care, a really, really important and underfunded area of the health services. So I want to support that motion, and I want to support as well the Dublin West motion. Ireland is actually in the last chance saloon on digital taxation. Even the Tories in England, in the budget last week, said they're going to move to a digital tax on IT-style products to be paid from about 2020 onwards. France has advocated that, Spain, Italy and Austria. And really, we have to look at how, in an IT age, we get a fair flow of taxation from the activities of the really big IT companies locally and on a worldwide basis. And for the same reason, we need a financial transactions tax here in Europe and across the world that will allow money generated by people go back into their countries and communities on a fair basis, whether in Ireland or across the wider world. I recommend the motions to you, delegates.
Thank you, Joan. We're now going to vote on these motions. All in favour of motion 46, please show. All against. I declare the motion carried. Motion 47. All in favour, please show. All against. I declare the motion carried. And now there was a proposal to refer back motion 48, which was duly seconded. The movers of the motion inform me, to my right here, that they are not accepting reference back. So I'm going to put the proposal to refer back first. All in favour, please show. All against. The motion to refer back is defeated. So motion number 48 is now before the floor. All in favour, please show. All against. Motion number 48 is carried. And now we're moving on to the debate on foreign affairs and trade. And if we could have the movers of composite number 1, which embraces motions number 49 and a number of other motions. Who's moving? Labour Youth? Chloe? Sorry? I can't hear you, Chloe. Just move.
Okay, comrades. The spirit of this motion, I think, ties in very well to trade unionism, which is a concept that we're all familiar with, and one that I think drives the politics of the majority of the people in this room, hopefully. And trade unionism, to that principle, is so fundamental, the concept of solidarity and internationalism, and standing up for what is right and what is just. Our movement was founded on the principle of withdrawing our labour when there is an injustice taking place. Now, on an international level, what we have the opportunity to do here is to withdraw capital when capital is facilitating the oppression of people. And I think, for those who aren't familiar, there are 3 demands of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement: to end the occupation and colonisation of Palestinian land that was invaded in 1967 during the conquest of the West Bank and Gaza and dismantling the apartheid wall there. Number 2, to recognise the rights of Palestinian civilians of Israel and to full equality. And number 3, to respect, protect and promote the rights of Palestinian refugees, of which there are roughly 5 million, those refugees of 1948 and 1967, to return home as stipulated in the United Nations Resolution 194. This is a peaceful movement. It looks at consumer, academic and cultural boycotts. These are all peaceful, totally acceptable means of withdrawing our support for what is an extremely brutal and oppressive regime. It isn't a case of opinion of what is happening in Palestine. The State of Israel is continuously breaking international law. The West Bank is, according to the United Nations, illegally occupied, and I don't think that that's something that I can stand over as a Labour Party activist, and I hope that the rest of the room feels the same way. There is the largest open-air prison, people surrounded by walls where they can't leave. We've seen stories of women giving birth at checkpoints because they haven't been allowed through to receive the adequate healthcare that we need. For the year that's in it, where we've cared for women in our own country, I think that it's necessary that we take a stand and don't allow that to happen to people overseas, because that's not right and that's not something that we should be allowing as a Labour Party. There are nearly 200 unarmed Palestinians have been killed already this year. There have been over 5,000 unarmed protesters injured by live fire by the IDF. This is a regime that people in Israel have been forced to become complicit in through the behaviour and the actions of politicians like Benjamin Netanyahu, and it's really important that we as spectators and observers from abroad take a stand and do what we can, which is to implement this peaceful objection to what is happening over there. There are 100,000 Jerusalemites cut off by the wall. This is illegal, and Israel has totally ignored demands of the international community to take a step back. There's increasing pressure from people who are trying to impose the kinds of politics that facilitate those atrocities onto people. So it is more important than ever now that we stand together as a Labour movement in solidarity with our comrades in Palestine and in solidarity with trade unions like my own SIPTU, which has already signed up to the BDS directive. So I hope that you will all support this motion.
Thank you, Chloe. Who's seconding the motion? Have we a seconder? I'll second it. Formally seconded. Thank you, Delegate. Now we have 2 addenda, or is it addendum? We have 2. We have one in the name of Dublin Central Constituency Council. Have we a mover for that? Have we a mover for that? Is somebody from Dublin Central Constituency Council prepared to go on record and formally move it? Yvonne.
Are they not already incorporated into it, Jack?
Well, this is the addendum.
That's the original motion, though.
This is the addendum.
They're incorporated into the concept.
Oh, yeah.
Comrades, I just want to first of all agree with what Chloe said so accurately about Palestine, and it's something I've been active on for a while. Eurovision, beloved to a lot of people, I know. I don't think we can support a Eurovision while children are being locked up in prison. I don't think that's something we can do. I don't think we can support Eurovision while there are peaceful protesters being shot. And I would hope, and I know that people who support the BDS campaign would hope, that we can have relations with Israel, we can, have the Eurovision hosted, but not while children are in prison, not while people are being shot. So that's why I'm proposing this addendum. And I hope that we can be active on this and that we can say that no, we can't have, as I said, children in prison or peaceful protesters being shot. We can't do that. So that's why I'm proposing that Ireland would boycott the Eurovision this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Declan. It's been pointed out to me that that addendum is already incorporated in the composite, so it was procedurally an error on my part. I apologise to conference. We'll do another hour tomorrow afternoon for that. But so we have composite number 1 properly moved and seconded. Now motion 50 on human rights in Turkey. Yvonne, in the name of the Central Council.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yvonne O'Callaghan, Cork South Central, and member of the Central Council, moving motion 50. Comrades, in 2015, the Turkish government instituted a state of emergency, and within the last 3 years, until it has been lifted in the last few months, 170,000 workers have been dismissed from their jobs, the vast majority of them being public sector workers. 82,000 citizens have been arrested without due cause or due judicial process and languish in Turkish jails. 3,003 schools and universities have been shut down. Over 6,000 academics have lost their jobs, many for simply signing a petition asking for peace talks with the Kurdish people. 189 media outlets have been shut down and 319 journalists have been jailed. What do they all have in common? They support a Turkish state based on the values of democracy, secularism and equality. They are progressive democratic individuals who are members of the HDP party, trade unions and civil society, and they are opposed to the policies of the governing AKP party and President Erdogan. For workers who have been dismissed in the state of emergency, they have been blacklisted. They can never work again, either in the public sector or the private sector. They have not been entitled to any state assistance from the minute they have been dismissed into the future. And they are subjected to travel bans, which includes the cancellation of their passports, not only of them, but of their families, and they languish in poverty now. Moreover, comrades, the Turkish government has jailed more than 13 elected members of parliament of the pro-Kurdish democratic opposition, the HDP party, including their co-chairs, and has taken direct control of 82 municipalities, suspending, incarcerating elected mayors and local public representatives. Given the importance of the HDP's struggle not only to the international left and to democracy, but to peace in a region devastated by conflict, we now need to step up the solidarity efforts. It is clear, comrades. I commend this motion to conference. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Yvonne. Is there a seconder? It's formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. On motion 51 in the name of the Central Council, Dominic.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. Dominic Hannigan, Meath East, representative on the Central Council. Colleagues, we'll all be aware from our TV screens of the migrant crisis that exists across the world, whether it's people fleeing from Guatemala up through Central America to the US, or people from Africa making their way across the Mediterranean waters to the sanctuary of Europe, or whether it's the Rohingya fleeing persecution in Burma. People are moving because of persecution and because of fear. They want to find a safe place for themselves and their families. And how we deal and respond to this crisis defines our level of humanity. Countries such as our own in Ireland, we understand this issue in our souls because of our history. So too do others. Germany was exemplary in taking in over 1 million refugees over the last couple of years. And we need to work with countries like that. We need to meet the challenge at a European level and at an international level, because no country can deal with this issue on their own, and no country can close its borders to the issue either. Membership of the European Union bestows many advantages on us all. Freedom of movement, freedom of expression, economic prosperity. But colleagues, it brings responsibilities too, and frankly, the response from Fine Gael's continental cousins in the European People's Party in places like Hungary under Viktor Orban. That's disgraceful. And it's time for the EPP to kick these people out. They've had enough. They've had their chance. They haven't responded to pressure. They need to be kicked out. And I hope next week we'll see them do just that. Because thankfully our allies in the PES, we've been very clear about this. We said that this answer and this crisis must be dealt with by people working together and by sharing responsibilities across the nation states. We will take action on this. We will end direct provision. We will legislate to make hate speech a crime. We will legislate against xenophobia. And we'll address the root causes of the whole issue of the refugee crisis. That will include things like the arms trade, climate change and poverty. And that will be our answer from the Labour Party and from the PES. And to those out there who want to use this crisis to divide us, to those who want us to fail, we say to them, you can keep your hatred. We don't want it. That's not our way. Last month, Ireland had a chance to listen to the vision and the values of President Michael D. Higgins and compare them to the empty rhetoric and false promises of others. Well, last weekend, we gave our answer, colleagues. We're a nation of inclusivity. We're a nation made stronger by the depths of our differences. We're straight, we're trans, we're Corkmen, we're Dubliners, we're Presbyterian, we're Muslims, we're Jews, we're Catholic, we're stay-at-home mums, we're travellers, we're Irish, we're all Irish, and we're better off together and stronger for it. Colleagues, I recommend this motion to the House. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dominic. Is there a seconder for the motion? Formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. Now, motions number 49, which is composite number 1, motion number 50, and motion number 51 are before the floor of the speakers. Dermot.
Delegates, comrades, Dermot Manning, Jim Larkin, Branch Ballantyre, Dublin Rathdown. I just want to speak in reply to motion number 49, in particular about the aspect of boycotting the Eurovision next year. The motion as it currently reads is that the boycott should be if Israel proceeds with proposals to host the Eurovision in Jerusalem. Well, that decision has been made. It's not been made held in Jerusalem. It's been held in Tel Aviv. Eurovision itself, I believe, is an event which over 60 years has actually preached inclusivity. It's not a political event. Ireland has participated now for nearly over 50 years and has participated with honour. I believe that by engaging in these events, by going to the contest next year, Ireland can shine a light. Our participation will help shine a light on issues over in Israel, and I think the fact that it's in Tel Aviv itself, almost uniquely amongst the Middle Eastern countries, is a city with a very large LGBT population, as the biggest Pride festival in the Middle East takes place there as well. I believe that boycott would send the wrong signal. I believe that Ireland should participate, and therefore I think this motion, this aspect of the motion, I do not support, and I would ask conference not to support it either. Thank you.
Thank you, Dermot. Now, you wanted to speak, delegate?
All right. I'm Oisin Tiernan, Wexford Branch, Wexford constituency. Now, in the context of this, I feel the addendum is not necessary in the context, as was said before, of the Eurovision. I feel like I cannot condone, of course, the actions of the Israeli government against the Palestinians. I feel that's completely wrong. But I think a cultural boycott is not necessary in this circumstance, especially in the context of the Eurovision itself, which we have such a rich history in. We've participated for the past 60 years and won it 7 times. So to pull out of it just because of the hosting would be completely, well, just throwing a baby out with the bathwater. The original motion does state that we should boycott the event as it's being hosted in Jerusalem, a city in dispute, but no part of this event will be hosted in the city. It's all being hosted in Tel Aviv, as was said before. But why is a boycott necessary? This is meant to be an event for it's meant to bring unity and bring Europe together. And to refuse to participate because of the host country is completely unfair. It'll worst affect the European broadcasting unions and not the Israeli government. We sent Jedward to the contest in 2012 in Azerbaijan, known human rights abusers. There was never an issue before. Like in 2004, we participated in Turkey, who has been stated in the motion before, subject the Kurds to such hell. So why would we start with Israel? To conclude, yes, of course, I urge you to vote for the original motion, but I cannot agree with the addendum. We can have an effect with a financial boycott, but this partial cultural boycott is quite frankly unnecessary. Thank you.
Any further speakers?
Hello everyone, Jack Merriman, Holt Sutton Branch. I'd like to speak in favour of motion 49 because I think that it's very important that we do put it forward. Because the fact is that boycott, divestment and sanctions isn't just trying to make a fuss about something, it has practical effects. It really provides practical incentives for the human rights abusers to change their ways. Because there has been effect so far. There's been multi-million dollar contracts terminated in Israel, and I think that this has had a very practical effect. And because Israel does have elections, it means that the government is beheld to political opinion. And if sanctions start causing an adverse effect in Israel, then the government must change its ways to make sure that people in Israel are doing okay. So in that context, we must acknowledge that boycott, divestment and sanctions provides a practical economic incentive to Israel. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. Are there any further speakers? Joanna?
I just walked in the door, so I'm not very prepared, but I suppose I wanted to make the point that we had this debate a few years ago, and in fact, at the time, Michael D. Higgins was our foreign affairs spokesperson, and he basically said, and Princess Rossa agreed, that for tactical reasons, we shouldn't have a boycott of Israel, and we rejected a motion. We passed a very critical motion in relation to Israel at the time, and I myself, I'm absolutely opposed to boycotts in relation to Israel, but I am totally critical of the actions taken by the Israeli state. I totally disagree with them. I condemn and abhor many of their actions, but I just think in terms of, and I noticed that the Eurovision thing is brought into it, apart from anything else, it's a song contest. You know, it's not some kind of state event. You know what I mean? If it was okay for us to be in the Eurovision this year when Israel were participating, why would we boycott it just because they won? You know, it's totally contradictory. And will we be back in the Eurovision next year, you know, when it's in a different country? I think we need to engage with the Israelis. We have a very bad history in relation to the treatment of the Jewish people in Europe. They were wiped out in many European countries. If you look at Eastern European countries in particular, and look at basically the whole of the Jewish culture in Europe was practically eradicated, you know, thanks to the Holocaust and the aftermath, and before that, the treatment of Jewish people. So I think we need to engage. We need to try and bring both parties. We should be very supportive of the Palestinians and look for a two-state solution, and I don't think a boycott is the answer. Thank you.
That was Joanna Tuffy from Lucan Branch. Willie Hamilton wants to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, comrades. I don't intention of speaking on this. I fully support the motion that is put to the floor. And I just want to remind people that are apologists for the Israeli state and their fascist treatment of the Palestinian people, that the same excuses was made in South Africa by the rugby players at the time. Let's not forget that. Thank you.
So, any further speakers offering? Yes. So I'll let Andrew speak first.
Thank you, Chair. Comrades, it was once said, and this is in relation to our apparent failures to boycott the Eurovision in Azerbaijan and Turkey. It was once said, just because you can't do everything, it doesn't mean that you should do nothing. And I support composite number 1, motion 49, because we should stand in solidarity with those who are being oppressed. It should hurt people. It should absolutely hurt people when you are bullying them, when you are showing them that you are showing solidarity with the victims of continuous violence, of starvation, of humiliation, of disgusting sanctions put on them because of the actions of a minority. We should absolutely stand in solidarity with these people, and that even should include a cultural boycott of the state that is actually doing these things to these people. And I would like you to support the motion. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you, Andrew.
Brian Aylward, Northern Ireland delegate. Sorry to hog the microphone. I know I spoke last night. I want to speak very, very, very strongly in support of motion 49. A number of people have made the comments about why we didn't boycott the Eurovision when Azerbaijan and when Turkey hosted it. There's a very big difference, and people are asking the question, why the Israelis? I'll tell you a very big difference between the Israelis and the Turkish state and the Azerbaijan state. Turkey and Azerbaijan don't claim to be the only democracies in their region. Israel does. And the arguments being put forward by Joanna Tuffy and others are the same clapped-out arguments that have always been put in opposition to boycotts in the past. They were the same arguments that were used by Margaret Thatcher in opposition to boycott of South Africa. They were the same arguments that were used in opposition to boycotts of Indonesia in view of their illegal, illegitimate and immoral occupation of East Timor. And in the same way as those arguments were wrong then in the case of South Africa and East Timor, they're wrong now. Comrades, it is very timely that we are debating this motion in 2018. And I want to echo all the points that have been made by other speakers in supporting and putting forward this motion. But I think it would be wrong of me not to go off the platform today without reminding members that this year marks the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which has had many consequences for the people in Palestine. And it is also, which followed 3 years after the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1915, which determined many of the modern borders of the Middle East. It is the 70th anniversary of the Nakba, which many Palestinians refer to as the period in which the Israeli state came into being. Nakba is the Arabic word for the catastrophe. And it is also important that we're debating this issue in the context of the fact that Dáil Éireann unanimously passed a motion in 2014 to support the recognition of Palestine, something which has not been followed through at ministerial level. And I would like to use this platform as an opportunity to call on the government to follow through at ministerial level what was actually agreed in 2014. So please support this motion in the true spirit of international solidarity that has served this party so well over the years. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Dennis Vaughan from North Clare. I strongly support this motion. Israeli forces are basically terrorising the people of Gaza, Palestine, etc. Terrorism doesn't work by other states. Look at the Black and Tans in this very country. Cultural boycotts do work. It worked in South Africa. It'll work in Israel. We must force the Israeli government to start peace talks immediately. They refuse to speak, and hopefully bring peace between the two peoples. Bombing hell out of Gaza does not work, and it's not right. Let's boycott. Let's have a cultural boycott of Israel. Thank you.
Now, we are now approaching an hour behind time, so I think that we've had a very good exchange of views on this crucial issue, and I'm going to invite Senator Ivana Bacik who is the spokesperson, to respond to all of the debate on these motions. Ivana Bacik, comrades.
Gurmaga Jack, comrades and friends, thank you to all of you who took the time to speak, to put forward motions and to speak today on foreign affairs issues. The speeches, I think, brought out what is best about Labour Party conference, and I've been coming to conferences now for more years than I care to remember, so it's great to hear the passion and the eloquence that so many of you brought to the debate. I should say that I am the Labour Party representative on the Oireachtas Foreign Affairs Committee, and on your behalf I have there been raising issues on Palestinian rights, indeed on the rights of those in Turkey who are so badly being treated currently by the Erdogan government, and indeed we've also been raising, all of us on your behalf in the Shannon and Dáil, the need for a just and fair and equal migration policy, all of the issues that are addressed in these motions 49 to 51 today. In addition, I've been raising issues around the Syrian war and conflict, and more recently around the brutal killing of Jamal Khashoggi by Saudi Arabia. I would urge you, comrades, to support all three motions, and I want to just speak briefly about composite number 1. And I would say this, that the vote is on composite number 1, not on the addendum, and therefore the call is for support for the boycott, divestment and sanction campaign, which I have personally supported, as have many in the PLP for many years now. I should say that the Labour Party has a stated policy of a two-state solution, a negotiated peace and a two-state solution. Eamon Gilmore, as Taoiseach and Minister for Foreign Affairs, stood up strongly for the rights of Palestinians, and I think we have a strong track record on this. In addition, the Irish government has committed over the years millions in aid to the rebuilding of Palestinian homes destroyed by Israeli Defence Forces. We've seen US President Trump reducing the US commitment to UNRWA, the UN relief agency in Gaza, and the illegally settled territories, by €360 million. So we know that there is immense need in Palestine. We know that the policy of demolition and of illegal settlements has destroyed the homes and lives of many Palestinians, and we do need to take a stance. And I would strongly urge you, colleagues, to support Composite 1. And I would say this, it is conditional in terms of the boycott of Eurovision, and I would always bow to Dermot Manning's superior knowledge of the Eurovision, but I would say this, that the call in Composite 1 is to boycott if Israel proceeds to host Eurovision in Jerusalem. And as we all know, there have been huge international calls against and condemnation of Trump's action in proposing to move the US embassy to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is contested, as we know, and we need to take a strong stance on that. In addition, in the Shannon, my colleagues Aon, Kevin and Jed and I have taken a strong stance in supporting Senator Francis Black's bill prohibiting import of goods produced in the occupied territories. So I think we have a strong policy. We need to build on that, and I would urge you to support our colleagues in the trade union movement in supporting the BDS campaign, supported by so many peace activists in Israel also. And I think the other speakers have put the support for Composite number 1 very eloquently indeed. Finally, I just want to say that I think what all three motions have in common, in urging you to support all three have in common, as Dominic put it so strongly, a strong affirmation of our socialist politics, of international solidarity, of standing up for justice for the oppressed, of standing up for equality, of putting forward a positive vision of solidarity, and of condemning the bitter, divisive politics of hate that we've seen unfortunately come to the fore across so many countries in recent years. So as our re-elected President, Michael D. Higgins, put it so strongly and eloquently in his own speech last weekend, we need to stand firm, to stand positively for a politics of solidarity. We need to condemn the rise in racism, to condemn a rise in anti-Semitism across the world, to stand in solidarity with the people in Pittsburgh, the victims of such a brutal anti-Semitic attack last week in their synagogue as they prayed. And I think we need to stand for equality and for solidarity. And in that spirit, comrades, I would urge you to support all three motions. Gur maith go leor.
So thank you, Ivana. So now we're going to vote on these three motions, and we're voting first on Composite number 1. are our tellers in the room, by the way? All here? All here, Dermot? Okay. All in favour of composite number 1, please show. All against? Abstentions? It's very clear. I declare composite motion number 1 carried. Thank you, delegates. So now, motion number 50. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare motion 50 carried. And motion number 51. All in favour, please show. All against? I declare the motion carried. And now we're going to go on to where we should have been an hour ago. We're going to deal with housing, planning and local government. And I would greatly appreciate the generosity of any delegate charged with moving a motion who refrains from speaking and just simply moves it formally, because we've had a lot of time on housing. Crucial issue, but we have to try and deal with all the other issues as well. So the movers, please, of motion number 60. Motion number 60. Thank you, Jerry. Jerry Kerr, formally moving motion number 60 in the name of Cabra and District Branch of Dublin Central. Sorry, in the name of the Central Council, my apologies. Motion number 61 in the name of the Cabra and District Branch in Dublin Central. I take your point, delegates. I take your point. I take your point. I take your point. It's a combination of the heat and the age. Motion number 52 in the name of the Donamead branch was to be moved. Formally moved. Thank you, delegate. And motion number 53 in the name of the Newport branch, similarly formally moved. Formally moved. Thank you, delegate. Yes, I take your point, Sean. Thank you. Is there a seconder for motion number 52? Formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. Motion number 53 now was formally moved. Is it seconded? Thank you, delegates. Formally seconded. Motion number 54, Cork South Central. Is there a mover? Formally moved. Is there a seconder? Formally seconded. Motion number 55 in Limerick City Constituency Council. I take it it's formally moved somewhere, is it? Formally moved, John O'Sullivan. Is it formally seconded? Thank you, delegates. Motion number 56 in the name of Galway West Constituency Council. Is it formally moved? Somebody from Galway West Constituency? Neil, is it Neil? Is there a seconder? Formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. And motion number 57, Little Pace Branch, Dublin West. Is it moved? Is it seconded? Thank you, delegates. Motion number 58, Kildare South Constituency Council. Is it moved? Formally moved. Thank you, Willie. Is it seconded? Formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. Motion number 59 in the name of Mulhuddock Branch in Dublin West. Formally moved. Mary, thank you. Is it seconded? Thank you, delegates. Motion number 60 was moved, I think. Yes, by Jerry Kerr. Is it formally seconded? Yes, thank you. Motion number 61. Declan, thank you, Declan.
Declan Mina, Cabra Branch and Area Rep. Sorry for not formally moving, but I'll get to that, and there is a reason, because this motion does move us in a different way on housing slightly. I stand before you as someone who is twice as likely to be homeless because of my disability. I stand in front of you as someone who's part of the locked-out generation that has barely any hope of even renting. Politically, for me, something Michael D said was to be the arrow, not the target. And I hope this motion is part of that. Sometimes we can get in the weeds, and sometimes we can think, none of this is possible. And sometimes we can be told by certain barristers that, no, you can't do that. And that isn't what we need. That isn't what my generation needs, and that isn't what homeless people need. We need leadership, and we need to show that something different can happen, and it can. In Paris, it is illegal to evict someone in the winter. These rent controls, I didn't think of rent controls one day in Cabra when I was bored and say, wouldn't this be a great idea? These happen in every other country, nearly. And it is absolutely clear we can have rent controls. If you look at the current rent prices, this is like someone with a bleeding arm, and the government's solution is not only to give dietary advice, but to give bad dietary advice and tell them to eat KFC while their arm's bleeding. We need a bandage, and that bandage is a rent freeze. Now, I want to be clear here. No one should have a secure home and get loads of money while causing families to be homeless. We need a rent freeze. And just so we're clear on this, if it's unconstitutional, and admittedly I'm not a barrister, I don't speak Latin, but if there's still a question whether it's constitutional or not, but if it is unconstitutional, we need to have the referendum. Because it says it in the name. We're not on the side of capital, we are on the side of Labour. So I want to say this. We have to move, and we have to move now on this. We have to bring legislation that will both freeze rents and reduce it, because we've seen smoking cause cancer, so we've gone and we've regulated that. The fact is that rent increases cause homelessness, so we need to ban them. This is difficult, and I'm not saying that isn't. But as James Larkin said, the great only seem great because we're on our knees. Let us rise.
Thank you, Declan. Now, is there a seconder for motion 61? Formally seconded. Is there a mover for motion number 62 in the name of Sean O'Casey branch in Dublin Central? Joe, you're going.
Chairman, Joe Costello, Sean O'Casey branch, Dublin Central. I don't believe for a minute, and I don't think anybody in this hall believes, that the present government can possibly solve the chronic shortage of housing, and that we will continue to see increases in the 10,000 homeless and the 100,000 that are on waiting lists. Fine Gael, to my mind, in their political life, have never built a single social house. Because every time that Fine Gael have been in government, they've been in government with the Labour Party. In the 1990s, well, we had Fianna Fáil for a while, but it was in Stag and Liz McManus that were building the houses. Sorry, in the 1990s. In the 1980s, Liam Kavanagh did it. In the 1970s, it was Jimmy Tully. In 4 years in government in the 1970s, Jimmy Tully built over 100,000 social and affordable housing. That is an incredible record. And what does Fine Gael do? It puts everything into the basket of the private developer. So they cannot succeed. There is absolutely no way. But what we need at the present time, and Jan has done a marvellous job in relation to the housing policy, we have a comprehensive package of proposals, but we need to be able to take it by the scruff of the neck in terms of delivery, urgently, because we need homes immediately. I believe that there is one way that we can immediately set this in action, and that is by immediately reconfiguring NAMA, the National Asset Management Agency. That is a semi-state body, remember. It was set up in 2010 to dispose of impaired assets belonging to the state. It has largely completed that job. It is at the present time building 20,000 units of accommodation. We will only get 10% of that 20,000 for social and affordable hearing. For
Joe, the time is up.
I'm sorry. So what I am saying...
The time is up. The time is up, Joe. The time is up.
Okay.
Joe, my apologies to you. Go up and move your motion.
Wow. And I was going to vote for Jack for chairman. So the point that I'm making, there is a semi-state body already there. It has $4 billion in the bank, which can be used for housing, can be used for leverage, and of course Jan has identified a lot more funding as well. It has the expertise, it has the architects, it has the engineers, it has the staff. I think we should be immediately proposing that NAMA cease its continuing disposal of any state assets, and that all the funding be directed to social and affordable housing, and that NAMA be a new semi-state body to start delivery on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I only allowed you to do that, Joe, because you had been so compliant when I asked you to stop. So, but I was wrong by asking you to stop in the first place. So, is motion number 62 seconded, please? Formally seconded. Now, motion number 63 in the name of Airfield and Eden Moor Branch. Is somebody prepared to formally move it? Formally moved. Is there anybody here from Airfield and Eden Moor Branch? Nobody here from Airfield and Eden Moor Branch. Motion number 64 in the name of the Rathmines Branch. Is there anybody here who is prepared to... Brian, thank you. We'll call speakers in a moment. Is there a seconder? Formally seconded. Motion number 65 on Clare Constituency Council. Is there a mover from Clare Constituency Council? Joe, thank you. Is there a seconder? Somebody is going to formally second it. Formally seconded. Motion number 66 in the name of Ian. Why not? Kilmechanic Branch in Wicklow.
Conference, I'm not going to keep you long. I think Councillor Mary McCamley this morning spoke about motion 59, which is quite similar, and she seemed to be chair of the Kevin Humphreys Appreciation Society. And she addressed most of what I wanted to say on the matter. Just in relation to this, though, Airbnb have said publicly that home sharing didn't cause Ireland's historic housing concerns, and that also that. But what I want to say is actually that this isn't just about home sharing. This is about Airbnb taking really good quality houses out of the market and into short-term lets. Conference, if you look at websites like daft.ie, in my own hometown of Bray, there are more Airbnb houses than there are on daft.ie for rental. It is exacerbating the prices, and I urge you to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Is there a seconder for motion 66? Formally seconded. Thank you. And now motion 67 in the name of the Central Council, Mary Freehill.
Thank you, Chair and delegates, and thank you to the Central Council for agreeing this motion last week that we could take it at the conference here today. In connection with this motion, we were all certainly very disappointed that the government reneged on their commitment to agreeing a directly elected mayor for Dublin. While I support the strengthening of our democracy at local level, I invite you to look more deeply into our regional and local and regional government system in Ireland. In fact, Ireland is the most centralised country in the democratic world. Outside of Leinster House, democracy is seriously lacking, and in fact ministers for local government have even diminished powers in recent years. I'm a member of the European Committee of the Regions and work alongside members from other EU countries who have very well developed democracies at local government level. Unlike our EU neighbours, we do not have many of the competencies that they have devolved to them at local government level. Examples of this are oversight, which includes inter alia health, water, rail, energy generation, policing, education, major roads and legislation, agriculture, social welfare, public transport, cultural tourism, capital investment projects and public housing, which of course the oversight is dealt with purely at central government level. Even in areas of noise and traffic powers and estate management, we have consistently asked government to amend legislation to give us powers at local government level. They can't do it because they're too busy. So local democracy means trust and transparency. And it's important that we point out that devolved local government also means greater participation for the citizen. Even the Central European countries that joined the EU recently, that were under communist rule, went to great lengths to democratise their local government systems. So it's significant that the Scandinavian countries spend 33% of GNP at local government level. Ireland, a paltry 7.5%, and I think that tells the whole story. If there was a will, and if government is so busy, much of this could be done by giving the Senate a lead role to reform local government. And I therefore urge you, delegates, to agree this motion so that the Labour Party would be allowed to initiate and promote a process to advance genuine reform of local government powers, including asking the Senate to take the lead role in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. Is there a seconder? Formally seconded. Motion 68 in the name of Sligo Leitrim Constituency Council.
Thank you, Chair. Hugh McConville for the Sligo Constituency Council. I want to take the opportunity to highlight something. This is something now that is different from everything else, but I've taken the opportunity to allow us room to bring this up here so we can bring it up at a bigger forum. It's in relation to the National Planning Framework, the social and planning framework that's going to govern all matters between now and 2040. I want to highlight is the imbalance of this plan. There are difficulties, serious difficulties, the way this plan affects the rest of the country, but there is nobody speaking out about the injustice that's been done to the whole west of the country. This plan lacks vision, it lacks insight, it's a total lack of imagination and a total lack of passion or belief that we can do something better. More than 1/4 of the landmass of this country is not mentioned in any meaningful way. That means most of County Donegal, Sligo, Leitrim, Roscommon, most of Mayo and Cavan and large parts of Galway have no serious infrastructure planning in this plan. All of the emphasis is on from Dundalk right around to Limerick and up to Galway. This is compounding. This is an attitude to the west of Ireland that people are saying, well, you're all bananas out there and you never do anything. The reason we don't do anything is for the last 50 years we've had no investment and no infrastructure. Now, it could be the fact that the lack of quality representation that we've had in the Dáil for the last number of years is something to do with it. But that is the injustice, and me raising this and getting your support will allow the Sligo Leitrim branch to raise this issue at a local level. And if we have support of the party, that this plan should be opposed at every opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Is it seconded? Formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. Now in motion 69, Jack Fitzgerald Branch Dunleary.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair. This is a subject I've been going on about for a long time, even when we were in government ourselves, but we had other things on our minds then, understandably. Many people in this country are missing out on their right to vote simply because they don't know how to go about it. This may seem strange here in Ireland, where everyone seems to have an opinion about politics, some of it informed and some of it definitely not. In my own involvement in adult literacy over the years, many people have told me that they wouldn't risk going into a polling station because, as they have put it, they don't want to be shown up. I suspect this applies to a lot of other people as well all around the country, as nearly, I'm sure everyone in this room probably has come across that kind of attitude themselves while canvassing. We've had many public information films for years about smoking, drinking, road safety, gambling, and even contraception in later years, but none on the very basics of one of our most important democratic rights, not to say duties, the ability to vote. I think everyone here in this hall has had the experience over the years of thinking that, you know, everyone but us knows how things are done. I propose that a short film about our voting system from start to finish should be made to be shown on TV, cinema, online, before every election and referendum. This would start with the polling card coming in the door, what to expect when you go into your average polling station, what a typical ballot paper looks like. Just to mention in passing that it was an ex-literacy student who battled for years to get photographs of electoral candidates beside their names on the ballot, which wasn't the case before. It would take longer than I've got today to go into the vagaries of the PR voting system and the lack of knowledge about it. That's for another day. Or the confusion about wording on some referendums, like in the recent blasphemy referendum, I think. As we can see from the recent presidential election, turnout is often not as high as it should be in our system. It may not be just because of indifference. All political parties are missing out at the moment because they're not doing all they can to make sure everyone can play their part in exercising their democracy as much as they would wish to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate. Is there a seconder for motion number 69? Formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. Now we're at composite number 2, which is to be proposed by Carrick-on-Shore branch.
Hello, my name is Sarah Dunn from the Carrick-on-Shore branch. In 2014, one of the biggest travesties that have happened in Irish politics was getting rid of the town councils. For Labour Party, who was built on town councils and local government, to not oppose that is, in my opinion, a disgrace. We need to continue to work to bring back town councils. In the last conference that we had in Wexford, we voted in favour of bringing town councils back to urban areas of more than 5,000 people. And this is something that we need to continue to do. We've seen it 5 years ago. Our numbers on a local level were absolutely decimated. Yes, in part to the unfavourable things that we were doing in government, and also in part to the fact that we don't have that local level. I encourage every one of our candidates going to the doors to say to their local constituents, we are the party that will bring a voice back to you. We need to bring a voice back to the people of Ireland, and this is a priority. I thank Senator Nash for the work that he has done in bringing forward a bill to our private members' meeting, and I hope that you will support this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. And I understand it's being formally seconded by Bray Connolly. Yes? Yes, thank you, delegates. So now we're at motion number 71 in the name of the Central Council. Is there a mover? Is somebody prepared to formally move it? Formally moved. Thank you, delegates. Delegate. And is there a seconder? Formally seconded. Thank you. Motion number 72 in the name of Dublin Central Constituency Council. Marie.
Marie Sherlock, Cabron District, moving motion number 72 on behalf of Dublin Central Constituency Council. Colleagues, comrades, friends, we've had a number of motions today, really good motions this morning and this afternoon on the issue of the housing crisis. And as we all know, no single measure will resolve the housing crisis. But a series of measures can and will have a real impact if the political will is there. I want to move motion 72. It focuses on just one specific issue, and that relates to the powers of local authorities with regards to derelict sites, acquiring derelict sites, and the power to incentivise the use of vacant sites. If we look at the various data sources, there's anything between 90 and 180,000 vacant properties across this country. I know in my own constituency where I'm active and a member of Dublin Central, there are hundreds of properties, of derelict properties that are a blight on the local community and deprive families of a viable housing option. We know in many local authorities across the country that the elephant in the room is the constitutional right to property, or the constitutional rights around property. And whether the chill effect is perceived or real, it's hard to interpret, but certainly it has deterred local authorities from taking action. I want to applaud the work of the Labour councillors in Dublin City Council and in Louth County Council for actually taking aggressive measures to take in charge derelict sites in their local authorities over the past number of years, but local authorities in other areas simply are not. So we need to do more. We need stronger legislation, and in particular, we need to shorten the time with which properties can be taken in charge, and secondly, reduce the cost. Delegates, I ask you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Is there a seconder? Is it formally seconded? Thank you, delegates. Motion number 72. Sorry, motion number 73 now, in the name of the Greystones branch, Eileen.
Sorry, Jack, but it's the only one on water. I'll try and be quick. Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, this motion is about the sovereignty of Irish water. That is, that Irish water remains solely in the ownership of the state as a public entity, utility. Of all the utilities available in this country, water is essential to life. Therefore, it needs to be protected from private ownership at all costs. The privatisation of water services in England and Wales has brought high financing costs and high costs to consumers. We do not want to see Irish people without water, especially given the recent European Parliament vote to cut off water for non-payment. Irish water was incorporated in July 13. Under the Water Services Act, it brought water and wastewater of the 31 local authorities together under one national service provider. Irish Water is a subsidiary of Irvia, not sure of the pronunciation, formerly Bord Gas, and is currently a semi-state body. The mismanagement of the setting up of Irish Water caused much fear and anger over water charges throughout the country, and with it brought fears of privatisation. Fine Gael present as being in favour of privatisation generally, and so the call for a referendum on retaining public ownership of water emerged. In 2016, the Water and Public Ownership Bill was presented to the Dáil. It had party support, including Fianna Fáil, and Fine Gael decided not to oppose it but to send it through committees. They argued that such an enactment in the Constitution could cause a lot of unforeseen difficulties, especially with group water schemes, etc. To date, no referendum has been set. Recently, our own Jan O'Connell raised the question as to why it was delayed. By 2023, it is planned that Irish Water will separate from Irvia to become an independent company. It is also planned that it will disassociate from the local authorities. This plan has increased the concern that on one hand it could be more easily privatised, or on the other that it could be more easily nationalised through referendum. Whatever the outcome, it's imperative that Irish Water remains in public ownership. It is preferable to do this through referendum, as then it can only be changed by the people of this country and not by a political party that leaves people homeless and insisting on sticking to an ideological capitalist belief. In December 14, Junior Minister Fergus O'Dowd warned that there were forces at work to privatise Irish water, and rumours abound about a certain Irish capitalist waiting in the wings to buy it. The 2004 Water Services Act had built in some protections against the privatisation of Irish water, but it is only legislation, and legislation can be changed by a majority in the Dáil. Therefore, we in Labour require a strong written policy that we are in favour of a referendum on the public ownership of water. I commend this motion to conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Is the motion formally seconded? Formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. Now, all of these motions are before the floor for debate. Peter. I was going to say I hope that nobody wants to speak, but anyway.
Apologies, Chair. Peter Horgan, Blackrock, Mahon Branch, candidate in South East Ward. I wish to speak on motion 67 that looked to restore powers to local government. I urge support of the motion, but with a slight hint of caution. There's no point divesting powers to an unelected executive unless we're prepared to divest real powers to elected representatives at local level. We have seen in Cork City recently a spend of €300,000 of taxpayers' money on a brand and a hashtag that tells Cork people they're from Cork. And I'm a proud Cork man, I know I'm from Cork, I don't need to be told I'm from Cork. And the big problem on that aspect was not one elected member of City Hall or County Hall was informed before this money was spent. This isn't an attack on the other parties, regardless of their standing in the political spectrum. This is a criticism of an unelected executive that is riding roughshod with public money throughout the country, and it has to stop. And I would say to the Senate, if the Seanad is the body to deal with this, it must do so quickly and decisively, and not sitting on its laurels like it has with its own reform for the last number of years. We need action if we are to have a real results that bring real democracy to the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I mean, look, sorry, delegates. I mean, we can continue it on, but it means that we're not going to deal with anything else at this conference. But if you want to speak, I have to let you speak. Go ahead, John.
I'll be very brief, Chairman. Johnny Walsh, Roscommon, Galway, member of the Central Council. I just want to speak in favour of the composite motion in relation to the restoration of town councils. I do, however, have a slight reservation about the wording of the last paragraph relating to the town councils being brought back for the 2024 local elections. The reason I have a problem with that is that I feel it might give licence to our party to feel they can put this on the back burner. We don't need it on the back burner. This is very, very urgent. We've already put it on the back burner already. This has been party policy for 4 years. For the first 2 years, to be fair, we did nothing. But I do want to acknowledge, for the last 2 years, a lot of work has gone in on the legal side, and Brendan Howland has introduced the bill some 4 or 5 weeks ago, and it's now at committee stage. So I want to recognise that. But I think we all realise that our town councils won't be back by May of next year. That's too big an ask. However, that doesn't mean we can take our eye off the ball. I think we have to keep motoring to ensure we get this through the Oireachtas. And I'd be looking for an assurance from our party spokesperson and indeed our party leader that no stone will be left unturned in the short term, and I mean the short term, and to deal with the other parties' independence and indeed the government to get this over the line ASAP. Thank you very much, comrades.
Sorry, Chairman. Jeremy Holt, English Spiegel. It's just a point on motion 61. You talk about improved squatters' rights by reducing the period of occupation from 12 to 5 years. This might be all right in the urban situation, but there's an awful lot of ramifications as far as farmland or rural property goes. I just want to make that point. You can work the rest out yourself.
Sorry, Mick, have we a mic for Mick, Brian?
I just want to comment on what Declan said about being a person with disability be more likely to be homeless, and that is a possibility. You know, people with disability want to live independent lives. One thing I will like to Dermot Lacey, Dublin City Council, the last lot of social housing he brought out, I think it was 7 houses of that were for people with disability. So in the rush to get housing done, I would ask people not to forget about people with disability, their needs and what they need. Secondly, I'm sorry about this, Chair, for the rush to build houses and whatnot, we've got to remember that the infrastructure has to go in, schools, shops, doctor surgeons and whatnot. So let's not forget that. That's very important. And then on motion number 69, I totally agree with. Labour with disability are always fighting to make things done in easy English. We have about 25% of our population have a reading age of 12. So it's important that we want to get a message across. We have to do it in easy English. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the time on these motions, particularly on local government, because I believe they're the most important motions we're discussing this weekend. Not alone was the putting people first, abolition of town councils, the single worst decision that was made. It was a decision which was politically targeted at the Labour Party and at the power base of our party in towns and cities throughout Ireland. It is imperative for our party that the most important and fundamental level of local democracy is re-established. It is not a coincidence that we are the only country in the European Union which has abolished town government level, and it was simply, purely and simply a Fine Gael ideological drive to take democracy away from people and to damage our party in particular and to damage social democracy and the left in Ireland. And I'm just going to say one thing, Chair. This evening, the party leader intends setting out for us the strategies that will happen at the next general election. I want to hear that the re-establishment of town councils is a red line issue for this party, that we will not enter into any government arrangement without it being simply signed up for. If we don't get town councils back, as far as I'm concerned, and I think most of our members, we should not be in any arrangement. Gurmagat.
Good afternoon, Catherine Clancy, Cork North Central. I just want to support the motion from Dublin Central Constituency Council, Maria Sherlock's motion, just to say on the acquisition and the acquiring of derelict sites that, you know, after many, many years, Cork City Council have slowly started to move on acquiring derelict sites. But I do think that the acquiring of derelict sites is welcome, but that the actual process is flawed insofar as that, you know, they're acquired by a tender process, so the property goes to the highest bidder and nobody knows who's going to acquire those properties. I think if anybody is to acquire those properties, particularly in residential areas, that the residents have suffered these properties for long enough, and if anybody is to acquire these properties, it needs to come with an application on a plan on that property as to how it will be developed and a time frame on when that development will start and when it will finish, because a lot of these properties are actually sold off quite cheaply, and what we have is going from one speculator to a second speculator. So I think it's essential that they come with a time frame on completion for Gurmina Mahagan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Liam van der Speck, Cavan Branch and local election candidate for Cavan Belturbet. I just want to appreciate the comments from previous speakers on town councils, because especially areas like Cavan that have been very well served by Labour town councillors and have no other representation now have nothing. So I think people like Des Cullen, who've been amazing mayors in Cavan, it's a real loss to the town, and not to have it, especially now as well, with housing, derelict housing are all around the town. It really, really does show. But the main point I just wanted to make, someone said earlier about that we don't talk about enough as a society about ideology. And I think that's really true in this issue. And I think Fine Gael absolutely have shown their colours. Owen Murphy and Leo Varadkar don't care. We hear Leo Varadkar earlier on the radio today, and he was confronted with the realities of the difficulties in getting accommodation for young families and students. And he's saying, oh, well, it's always been hard. For someone who talks about an Ireland of opportunity, I certainly hope the next generation of entrepreneurs are more ambitious than that. It's ridiculous. And he'd have the audacity to criticise proposals from the Labour Party, constructive proposals like we've had here on motions, or from John O'Sullivan, as though there's some crazy nonsense like the rent controls. And they'll do it in this. And meanwhile, they will propose things like incentives for first-time buyers schemes, which only add to the problem because they increase demand when it's a supply-side issue. So they're economically illiterate and still come after us. And what is the point in a housing market that doesn't provide housing, a decent quality housing that people can afford? The same way they go after minimum wage. If you have minimum wage, you increase it, we lose jobs. What's the point in those jobs if they're jobs that don't give people a wage that people can have a decent living on? There's no purpose. And it's had no infection of left-wing thinking, the current neoliberal status that we have, as a result entirely of their ideology. So, and as well, all they'll provide is incentives to developers, incentives to landlords, because that's their base, that's what they care about. They don't care about you. And the PDs and the Fianna Fáil over the decades, that mindset has just completely corrupted our housing market. It wasn't left-wing thinking that resulted in this substantial housing crash of 2008. So for anybody to be coming along and lecturing the left on how you do housing, well, I think you can certainly take a seat.
That's it.
Thanks very much.
GAV comrades, Max Kelly, Galway West. Very briefly on Proposal 56, which is to reform the Tenancies Act. This is really important. I see that the tagline as I drove into Dublin today, the New Republic. The current Republic is that a third of households are rented households in this country. We are going out canvassing the local elections next May, I think. 1 in 3 households who are knocking on doors are going to be rented houses. We need our elected representatives, and we need to put pressure on the Labour Party to reform the Private Tenancies Act so there is security of tenure for rented households. Michael Davitt, the Land League, is 3 centuries ago now, and we don't have it. I think this is something the Labour Party should be advocating. When my friends say to me, Max, why should I vote for Labour? This is something that we can be saying on the doorsteps. I put it to conference. Thank you.
Hi, Ger Mills, Athlone, Longford constituency. I didn't intend to speak, but I feel I have to because I've sat here all day listening about housing. In particular, number 61, a mandatory 4% rent reduction per year for the following 2 years. I want tenants to be able to stay in the houses that they've been in for the last 10, 11 years. We have 70,000 small landlords in this country, according to statistics. Each of them own 1 or 2 houses, so they've inherited it from their mum. They bought it when they were young and then had to move down the country for whatever reason. And now they're being lumped in time and time again with the vulture funds who buy hundreds of houses, who up the rent. Small landlords are keeping with the 4%, to my knowledge. They're working with their tenants to keep families in houses for decades because people can't move on now, so they have to stay. And I would just recommend that we sort of separate vulture landlords who aren't playing by the rules and smaller people. We want to keep people in houses, but more and more small landlords are having to get out because they're the ones going to work in the morning for smaller wages than they had in the boom. They're the ones trying to pay a mortgage of their own or still paying on the rented property. Landlord is not a 4-letter word. Everybody is not good or bad. There's differences, and I think we need to consider what the differences are. Thank you very much.
Now I want to call on John O'Sullivan, Party Spokesperson on Housing, to respond to the debate. John O'Sullivan.
Thanks, Chair, and I will keep it brief. I know we have very important motions coming up. I'd just like to thank all of those who have proposed motions both this morning and this afternoon. I've had an opportunity to speak quite a bit this morning, so I particularly want to just refer to the more recent motions that were proposed this afternoon and to say that I fully accept there were many of them around issues like strengthening local democracy and the town councils, around balanced regional development from Sligo Leitrim, around voting, which I think is really important, the Jack Fitzgerald's branch motion around people actually being able to vote because they're given the information that they need. The referendum on water, absolutely essential. And issues around the stick rather than just a carrot in relation to derelict sites, etc. Now, I suppose I particularly then would just like to focus on some of the two in particular of the other motions that were spoken about this afternoon. One being the one that Joe Costello proposed about NAMA. I don't know if any of you have had time to read the papers today, but NAMA are still paying developers up to $195,000 per year. So we absolutely need to reconstitute NAMA's purpose, and we propose that under our proposals in the National Housing Development Bank. We need to make NAMA a servant of the people. It was there to do things with the economy. We now need it to focus on housing. I also want to just refer to the last speaker and indeed to Declan's motion number 61. I realise there are issues around small landlords, and I think we need to look at those, and the specific issues around smaller landlords. But I don't want to reject the motion overall. There's a great deal of content in that motion, and if we are passing a motion on housing emergency, then in an emergency there's a lot of things you can do that you can't do, and I know there are constitutional issues here. There are a lot of things you can do in an emergency. Back when the banks needed to be bailed out, and we voted against the bailout, the government of the time did a lot of things to save the banks that we might have been told previously we couldn't do. We now need to save our people from homelessness. The theme of our conference is a new republic. We currently live in a republic of homelessness. We want to live in a republic of homes. That is what the Labour Party is about. So again, I would commend the motions to the members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. So now we're going to vote on all these motions. All in favour of motion number 52. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion number 53. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion number 54. Is it agreed? Agreed. If you're against, shout. Motion number 55. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion number 56. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion number 57. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion number 58. Agreed? Agreed. Motion 59. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion number 60. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion 61. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion 62. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion number 63 was not moved, so falls. Motion number 64. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion number 65. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion number 66. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion number 67. Is it agreed? Agreed. Motion number 68. Agreed? Agreed. Motion 69. Agreed? Agreed. The composite number 2 is agreed? Agreed, I think. Motion number 71 is agreed? Agreed. Motion 72 is agreed? Agreed. Motion 73 is agreed? Agreed. And now, thank you, delegates. I want to call on the Chair of Standing Orders, Fionnuala Richardson.
Afternoon, fellow delegates. Standing Orders proposes that conference be extended until 4:30. Proposers' times are reduced from 3 to 2 minutes, and as much as possible, seconders are asked to do so formally from the floor. I move.
you.
Is there a seconder for Standing Orders Report number 4? Formally seconded. Is it agreed? No one disagrees? Thank you, delegates. Because if somebody did... Well, sorry, somebody disagrees. No, sorry, delegate. I'll have to put it to the floor properly. So, Standing Orders Report number 4 proposes the extension of the time of this session to 4:30 p.m. and the reduction of the time for movers from 3 minutes to 2. And there is a request that, insofar as is possible, which is what is happening all day, that seconders would formally second. Now, all in favour of that, please show. All against. I declare Standing Orders Report number 4 carried. And we now proceed to deal with the motions on communications, climate action and the environment. And is there a mover for motion number 74? In the name of Wexford Constituency Council, you are now reduced to 2 minutes, delegate.
Thank you very much, Jack. Joe Ryan, Wexford Town Branch. Comrades, wish to move this motion on behalf of Wexford Town. About 3 years ago, Alex White, as Communications Minister, announced a competition to seek a national broadband provider, within which 5 years would have given us nationally high-speed internet throughout the country with 100% coverage. Labour expected that within a year, 1.6 million homes would have had high-speed broadband. Labour had a clear plan when in office. By October 2018, 85% of the country should have been directly connected to the national broadband network, and the job should have been completed by 2020. What was achievable 3 years ago is now being long-fingered by this government. And then Labour left the political scene. Left behind on the incoming minister's desk was a clear plan to select a company capable of delivering a broadband network to give rural communities like those in South Wexford the opportunity to share the broadband speeds that urban communities like Wexford Town accept as normal. But the reality now is quite different to what Labour aspired to. Recent figures confirm a broadband penetration in County Wexford of 67% and not 85%, and according to the then Minister Dennis Naughton, the best that could be hoped for in our county is 74% penetration. What has transpired under Dennis Naughton and Leo Bradford is the political equivalent of "come dine with me," and in this case the options, though, are off the menu. Well, like a Saturn V rocket, the National Broadband Plan has set off in its journey, dropping off parts as it goes. Firstly, Cyro and Vodafone, then Air, making the competition a one-horse race. The market didn't deliver competition and will not deliver. Just like housing, Fine Gael's Ireland of Opportunity gives many no option when it comes to broadband. Dennis Naughton, with the support of Fine Gael, has overseen a competition that dragged on and lost companies and the technological expertise and the infrastructure of the poles that can actually deliver real improvement in broadband. But they had their dinner dates with those that wanted to take a punt. They have no experience in delivering to customers. Conference, I would like to say more, but I'm mindful that my 2 minutes are up. I just commend the motion to the conference. Thank you.
Is there a seconder for motion 74? Bridget, thank you. Is there a mover for motion 75 from Rathfarnham Branch in Dublin South West? Aideen.
Thank you, Chair. Comrades, delegates, I suppose the motion that we put forward to you today from the Rathfarnham Branch is aiming to do a number of things. We're looking at establishing a commission that will look at the potential for job creation in the green economy. Therefore, I suppose, moving away from producing carbon emissions in as much as we can. We are also looking for an implementation strategy in order to move to a green or zero carbon economy. But more importantly, we're also looking for it to be funded and implemented, which I think is obviously a major, thing that we would have to look at. We put this forward on the basis that what we want to do, or what we believe is important in the Rathfarnham Branch, is that we're looking at decarbonising the economy, which is obviously of great benefit to society, but always and at all times prioritising job creation, job security and protecting decent and unionised employment. Comrades, we are going to see radical changes in the way work is, I suppose, just in the nature of work over the next number of years and decades. What this motion aims to do is actually to be ahead of that curve and at all times looking at prioritising social outcomes for workers, their families and their communities. We've had some good motions put forward over the course of the weekend so far in the areas of looking at big infrastructural projects. We've talked about the creation of cycle lanes, we've talked about the creation of social housing. What this would do what our motion would do would be prioritising those big projects, but also looking at, I suppose, the workers that are involved in putting those projects together and bringing them to fruition and bringing them to reality. We put forward the motion on the basis that we believe that the current government is playing into the narrative that it's about the individual, it's the individual's responsibility to tackle climate change. But comrades, as a Labour Party, we believe in the power of the collective, we believe in the power of society, and that's why we believe the state should play a strong role in moving to a zero carbon economy, and we really would appreciate it if you would support our motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aidan. And is there a seconder? Formally seconded. Thank you, Delegate. Now, motion number 76 in the name of Galway City East Branch, Galway West constituency. Motion number 76. Is there somebody here from Galway? Formally moved. Thank you, Delegate. Is it seconded? Formally seconded. Thank you, Delegate. So now motions number 74, 75 and 76 are properly before conference. Are there any speakers offering? 2 speakers.
Thanks, Chair. Delegates, I'm Kieran Ahern from the Rathfarnham branch as well. I just want to say climate justice needs to be a core Labour issue. The impact of climate change is and will be felt first and foremost by those on the fringes of our society, the very poorest. Those who contribute least to it are going to be the worst affected by it. Just yesterday evening, Dublin South West, we put forward a motion to make elimination of poverty the #1 goal of this party. And if working to mitigate the worst effects of climate change doesn't fall squarely within that goal, then I don't really know what does. Climate change is also a feminist issue. You know, 80% of those displaced around the world are women. 90% of women in Africa work in agriculture. This is going to be disproportionately affected by climate change. You know, we are such a generous country. We show solidarity through fundraising for various countries. I'd say everyone in this conference room has fundraised at some point for education or healthcare in a developing country. But the countries and cities most at risk are the likes of Calcutta, Dhaka in Bangladesh, Thailand, Myanmar, all of these countries. We now need to show our solidarity in different ways, delegates. We need to change our behaviours at home and change the focus of our industries. And Michael D gets it. Michael D is making sustainability a core, one of his core means of his election. He wants to promote the forms of economic activity which operate in an ethical way, respecting the environment and supporting decent employment. It's not a coincidence that the 2 Labour presidents of Ireland, Mary Robinson and Michael D, have made climate justice a core part of their lives' work. They see the need and they understand the opportunities. And it was heartening last night to hear Kevin Humphreys talking about, using sustainable transport and cycling to move towards Ireland's goals of eliminating our carbon. He gets it. We've got to move to a green economy. We've got to stop being afraid about it and get ahead of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Adrian, and while Adrian is approaching the podium, can I just remind you, delegates, that it's 1 minute now for speakers, and that timer is giving you 2, but ignore it, it's 1.
Okay, I'll do my best, Chair. Adrian Kane, Blackrock, Mahon Branch, Cork, South Central. I'm actually here to oppose motion 76 from Galway for one simple reason. It calls for the immediate end of the use of peat and coal for electricity generation. If we were to do that, the lights would go out. Of a calm day, Moneypoint still generates up to 33% of our electricity, and it's not possible to do that. Bordamona, where I worked most of my life and represented the workers in it, have gone through an announcement 2 weeks ago in which they will be out of peat by 2025. SIP2, my own union, has been promoting the concept of a just transition to a greener climate. And we passed a similar a motion to that effect 2 years ago. We have to get out of carbon emitting energy. Everybody knows that. There are no jobs on a dead planet. But it's about timing, and we need that bit of time in terms of trying to use, as what we had suggested, of using the PSO on peat to be put into a structural fund for retraining and for job developments in the towns that are most affected, such as Ferban, Road, Shannon Bridge, and all the small towns and villages that grew up because of Bordemona and the ESB over the last 40 or 50 years. So there's a lot to commend in the Galway motion, by the way, but that first point itself, I think, if it could be referred back, but I would be speaking against it on that basis. Thank you very much, Chair.
Wait now, sorry, Adrian. Adrian, are you asking Galway City East Branch to accept reference to, not reference back, reference to? Reference to the Central Council. The delegate from Galway, do you want to approach the rostrum, please? Will you approach the rostrum, please? Andrew, sorry, Andrew.
Delegates, thank you, and I don't want to take too much of your time. We were very specific in our motion in saying that we wanted an immediate end, because that is what that is what climate change demands. It is a big ask, and I understand that it is something that is going to be controversial and is going to impact people in their labour, but it is also it is the right it is the right response on a holistic basis, and it is the right response for us to make as a policy position.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
So you're not accepting reference to?
I would prefer not, no.
Okay, so are there any other speakers offering? There are no other speakers. I'm going to invite Sean Sherlock, party spokesman on the environment, to respond to the debate.
Thank you. In a few short minutes, and just to try and get us back on track time-wise, I just want to speak to broadband in the first instance, and just to say that we accept Joe's and the Wexford Constituency Council motion here. The issue of broadband is now predicated on a report that is to come from Peter Smith. But I think anybody with any semblance of common sense who is looking at the issue of broadband now can't have confidence in the national broadband scheme, because there are just too many errors that have been made. And so what I would propose here today is that we would employ a resource, a mechanism called the Services of General Economic Interest, which would allow the state to invest in an infrastructure through, for instance, the ESB network, to put in place an infrastructure into every home that would allow for broadband and fibre to be delivered to the home. And again, we now need to start talking about common sense, because I believe strongly that there is little or no confidence in the government's ability to be able to roll out a broadband scheme. I would not be in favour of the renationalisation of AIR, but I am in favour, absolutely, in investing in ESB, which we own, and let them roll out the infrastructure on a wholesale basis, and then let the market compete for the individual packages to come into every home. So that's the first proposal that I am making. In relation to climate change, we have the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly. I fully support the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly. There are 13 voted recommendations. Justice Mary Lafoy, I think, did a tremendous job. There would have been scepticism about the idea of setting up a Citizens' Assembly in the first instance because of the perception that it usurped the role of Parliament, if you will, or the democratic process. But there are 13 voted recommendations there that are absolutely radical. I am a member of the Joint Committee on Climate Action, and I will make sure, and I make sure daily, that the Labour voice is heard in ensuring that that report will be absolutely radical in terms of what we need to do as a society to bring about the change to mitigate against the effects of climate action. I would ask sincerely for Galway East, and I note what Mr O'Boyle has said, but we do need to talk about the just transition. I think there is something in the language of the just transition that allows for a transition period. It absolutely acknowledges the deleterious effects of climate change, but it does allow for the protection of workers in a transition period. And that is the language that I'm going to incorporate into the Climate Action Committee report as well. But I do ask for some little bit of compromise there, if at all possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. So now we're going to vote on these motions. Motion number 74 in the name of Wexford Constituency Council. All in favour, please show. All against. I declare the motion carried. Motion number 75 in the name of Rathfarnham Branch. All in favour, please show. All against. I declare the motion carried. And now we come to motion 76. And there was a proposal to refer the motion to, not back, to the Central Council, which means that the motion is dealt with by the Central Council on the basis of dealing with the difference around the immediate versus on the peat issue. So, all in favour of the reference to, please show. All against. I declare the proposal to refer the motion to the incoming Central Council to be carried. Thank you, delegates. Now, we move on now to party affairs, and we take first motion number 77 in the name of Fingal Constituency Council. Sorry, have we a mover? Rob. Councillor Rob O'Donoghue.
Hi guys. It's first time speaking at the conference, so I've been told I should sing it, but I might hold that for tomorrow. This motion is not asking that the party be tied to a pre-electoral pact with anybody. We should and we will set out our own alternative platform for government, and will accordingly be assessed by the Irish electorate on that. We understand that the party leadership needs leeway to be able to make a judgment after the next election, which they can bring to the members who will ultimately be the ones who decide whether we go into any coalition. What we're asking for is that you consider, and the key word in this is to consider, agreement with like-minded parties on a limited policy-by-policy basis. We believe that we should cooperate with like-minded parties who share our values and share our policies as a vehicle for supporting positive change in the country. Now, I acknowledge the motion to take out the extreme left. However, I disagree. Those on the extreme left are far more likely to not work with us and to fight with us than to back our agenda. And need I remind you that in the not-too-recent past, the extreme left are the people who have led some of the nastiest and most vitriolic campaigns against us. So I urge you to carry the motion in full, please.
Thank you, Rob. Is there a seconder? Is it formally seconded? Formally seconded. Thank you, delegates. Now, there is an amendment to be moved by the Jim Kemmy UCC branch in Cork South Central. Have we a mover?
Comrades, friends, Dylan O'Keefe, UCC Labour. UCC Labour believes that motion 77 is a fine motion. We do agree that the fair right is, of course, on the rise internationally, and we must work with like-minded groups to advance our left-wing politics and achieve the policies in that motion: public housing, slaughter care, a national childcare plan, truly free education, and tackle climate change. We have, however, proposed an amendment to the motion to remove the reference to a growing populism on a supposedly extreme left, an inclusion we believe to be counterproductive. I ask, who is this extreme left this motion speaks of? If in this country we are talking about the Trotskyites, well, let me tell you, there's nothing left-wing about opposing wealth taxes, so let's stop gracing them with the term left-wing. So who is it? Is it Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell? Is it Bernie Sanders or Alexandra Cortez? I've heard them described as being on the extreme left. So too are President Michael D. Higgins. Comrades, last weekend, as we celebrated the re-election of Michael D., many in Brazil woke in fear to the election of a racist, homophobe and misogynist. Comrades, let's not for a second equate anyone on the left or the perceived left with Trumpism or Bolsonaro or any of the international forces of reaction so worryingly on the rise. They are not the same, and it is counterproductive. Let's stop punching left and punch right and punch upwards. If we are to beat the right and see the implementation of the fine policies mentioned in the original motion, we must be left and proud. Proud to be left, proud to be Labour. And remember what Rosa Luxemburg said, it is socialism or barbarism. Please support the amendment. Thank you, comrades.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? Formally seconded. Thank you, Delegate. So, I'm going to take motion number 79 because it's in the same context as 78. Is there a mover of motion 79 from Newbridge Branch and Kildare South?
Chair. My name is Ciara O'Reilly and I'm here on behalf of the Newbridge Branch as Chair and local election candidate. Delegates, comrades, the recent history of the Labour Party and formation of a stable government is a history based on a simple concept, which was putting the country first. We endorsed this policy of putting our country's interests above our own party's interests. But we should not fail to forget that the only party interests we have are the interests of the party, the interests of the working class which we were formed to represent. I do not condemn, indeed I endorsed our party's position of making hard choices in difficult times, and as a party member I fully accept that had we not gone into government when we did, our class would have suffered greatly on the basis of what was contained in the Fine Gael manifesto and what they had proposed to do to the most vulnerable in our society. I applaud our representatives for the sterling work they did in diluting the proposals the Troika were intending to impose on our country in return for the loans to bail out our banks. We stopped this happening. But are we content? In preparation for the next election, in seeking the support of the Irish electorate to proclaim that they vote for the Labour Party, the party that stops things happening. I believe we are better than that. I believe that we became a political movement in order to make things happen. Our supporters demand that we articulate our programme for economic and social progress, and indeed justice, and insist that our support will only be forthcoming if the next programme for government contains red-line issues such as trade union recognition, delivery of our housing policy, the full implementation of the Sláinte Clare plan, or any other policy or principle we believe to be core to our value system and the cause that we espouse. Let us no longer be remembered as the party that stops things happening, and let us be known as the party who steadfastly refuse to support any party's attempt to form a government, who refuse to concede to our red line issues and commitment to implement these. We need to demonstrate our integrity. Delegates, I urge you please to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ciara. Now, are there speakers on motions 77 or 79? Dermot.
Chairman, comrades, Dermot Lacey, Donnybrook Branch. First of all, welcome to my own electoral ward, which I've been proud to represent for the last...
Sorry, Dermot, my apologies. There's an amendment. I should have allowed the amendment to be moved first. My apologies.
I'll take another chance.
I'm getting tired. Sorry, my apologies. There's an amendment in the name of Clondalk and Rathcoole branch to motion number 79. Is there a mover from Clondalk and Rathcoole branch? Andrew, formally moved. Is it formally seconded? Is it formally seconded? Formally seconded. Now, Dermot, my apologies. Where are you?
Thanks again. Well, I'm still proud to represent this area for the last 26 years. And next May, I hope to represent us for another 5 years after that. Comrades, I very seldom speak at a conference, but I am very worried about the amendment to motion 77. There seems to me to be a suggestion that populism on the left is somehow more acceptable than populism on the right. I don't accept that. I believe in honest politics. And if agreeing with the populists on the left means working with the bullies who trapped Joan Burton in a car, if it means acquiescing with the socialists who voted to reduce my constituents' property tax on Shrewsbury Road by thousands, to vote against the provision of homeless services, if it means voting for the people who voted against 900 social and affordable housing in Poolbeg and Ringsend because it wasn't 1,000, well, I don't want to work with those people. I want to work as part of a democratic, democratic socialist party that wants to deliver things. The truth is, the far left, the extreme left, call them what you will in this country, don't want to achieve things. They want to condemn people to poverty so they can build their campaigns. I want to take people out of poverty. I want to work with people like the Social Democrats, like the Greens, but not them.
I'm trying to compartmentalise the debate on these motions because we very probably will not be voting on them this evening the way the time is going, and by morning there'll be a great deal of confusion about what we're voting on. So are there any other speakers on motions 78, 70, 77 and 79? Andrew? 77 and 79. Andrew, do you want to speak? James, you want to speak? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Comrades, Andrew O'Brien, Clondalk and Rathcoole branch. I move the amendment for 79, but I'm actually going to be voting against the amendment and against the motion. Very quickly, I don't know how many of you here have actually seen the video of Neil Kinnock's speech at Bournemouth in 1985. I don't think it's too strong a word to couch what Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are doing in terms of actual evil. They are actually committing evil. 5,000 people a year die because they are too poor. And that is a fact. And to commit ourselves to coalition like we did, and I know, Jack, that you have mentioned that we did our best to save the working people from the harm of the neoliberal policies of Fine Gael. And indeed, we would do that one more time if we went into coalition, but we would absolutely sacrifice ourselves, we would sacrifice our voice, we would sacrifice our movement just to achieve small little crumbs on the table. We need to be putting forward a clear vision for the future of democratic socialism in this country. We need to be putting clear blue water between ourselves and Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, and to commit ourselves, even with red lines, to another coalition with the neoliberal right. We would be taking part in the harm that they would be doing. I tell you, comrades, we cannot do it again to ourselves. We cannot do it again to the working class. We need to survive in order to defend them. And I ask you, I plead with you, I beg of you, vote against motion 79. It will absolutely destroy us. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you, Andrew. James? Willie, you want to speak?
Thanks, Chair. Willie Hamilton, the Newbridge branch, the Labour Party. Chair, just in respect of the last speaker, who we have a great deal of respect for, he spoke about the crumbs off the table. If the crumbs off the table is free collective bargaining, is the implementation of Sláinte healthcare and the full implementation of our housing policy, I'll take those crumbs. Thanks, Chair.
Now, are there any other speakers on motions 77 and 79?
Conference. My name is Ben Slim. I'm a local area representative and recently became a candidate in the Tralee area. I want to speak against motion number 79. We speak about crumbs off the table. This isn't crumbs off the table. This would be accepting a watered-down version of the Labour Party that will go into government with just about anybody that will take us. I disagree totally with this motion. We need to create social democracy in Ireland. We need social democracy to be our main messaging, and we need to wait until the people of Ireland trust us to form a government with significant numbers, not sit in the wings with a smaller parliamentary party and say, well, if someone wants us after the election, we'll jump on board. Yeah, we'll have a watered-down couple of red line issues. Vote against this motion. Thank you, Conference.
Comrades, James Humphreys, Dublin Bay South. I'd urge you to vote for this motion, mostly because at the end of the day this motion is actually meaningless. Decisions will be made after an election when a programme of government will come before ourselves, and we can choose what we want to look at. Sorry, I wasn't planning on speaking. When we know what we're voting on, we'll know what the programme of government is. I'm a member of a party that doesn't just agitate and organise. I'm a member of a party that legislates as well, and we have to allow our parliamentary party to speak after an election to see what we will be voting on, or what can be delivered and what should be delivered. Thank you.
So now I think we've taken all the speakers offering on motions number 77 and 79. Yes? Sorry? No, okay. So now we move on to motion number 78 in the name of the UCC Jim Kemmy branch. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. Comrades and delegates, throughout its history, the Labour Party has been the most democratic party of any in the state. We were the first to give a vote for party leader to every member, and similarly, we now give every member a vote at party conference. At this conference, our proud party's 70th, UC Labour is asking you to further strengthen this party's democracy. We wish to amend the rules in relation to leadership elections so that any member of the Oireachtas will be eligible to run for party leader. This would mean for the first time that members of Shannon Éireann could stand. Maybe it will never happen, but why not give our members, each and every one of you, why not give our members the best and broadest choice of candidates to choose from? We've had many great leaders of this party, from Tom Johnson to Brendan Corish and Frank Lusky to name but a few. If we're serious about having great leaders like those, if we're serious about having a voice who stands against the right, who will espouse Labour values of socialism and social democracy, who will fight for workers' rights, feminism and equality, if we're serious about having a leader like that, then giving members the best choice of candidates is clearly the best way forward. Voting for this motion does not mean that we'll have to have a senator for a leader. It does not necessarily mean we will ever have a senator as leader, but why not give members the option? On that very point, though, the Labour Party also has a proud tradition of having exceptionally talented senators, two of which went on to become Uachtar an Éireann. Who among us would say that neither Michael D. Higgins nor Mary Robinson was not perfectly capable of leading this fine party? In this changing media environment, what can be said and ignored 10 times during leaders' questions in the Dáil can be put across through social media, on the radio, in interviews, etc. I have no doubt that if we were to elect a senator as leader, that our fantastic party spokespersons in the Dáil will continue to hold the Taoiseach in this blue shirt regime, or any future Taoiseach, to account. Other parties in the state have had leaders from outside Dáil Éireann and have not suffered from it. But the points stand. Giving the members the best and broadest choice for candidates for leader is the best way forward. The more choice, the better representation. I urge you all, comrades, to vote in favour of this motion.
Thank you, James. Colin? Go ahead, Colin.
Thanks very much, Chair. Colin Lawless, Dublin South West. I want to speak to oppose this.
Wait, no, sorry. Is it seconded? Sorry, I thought you were going to second it, Colin.
Oh, God, no. That's
Formally seconded. Formally seconded, yes? Okay, it's formally seconded. Now you may speak, Colin.
Thanks, Chair. You saved me from a very unfortunate situation. I want to oppose this motion for a number of reasons, and I do want to allude to the previous speaker's point about senators and giving examples of senators. I can think of examples of many TDs as well down through the years who would make fine leaders, and indeed you mentioned Michael D. Higgins. Michael D. Higgins was himself a TD for a very long period of time. You mentioned that it has never suffered, or parties have never suffered from this fate. Actually, it's the sign of a dying party that we end up with a situation where senators who are not elected by the people become leaders. A good example of that is the PDs. The first thing I would say is the role of the Parliamentary Labour Party is to challenge government. If the leader is not a TD, and these are important procedural points, he or she may not ask parliamentary questions, oral or written. That means we don't have somebody questioning the Taoiseach. The Seanad has no mechanism of participating in leaders' questions in the way that the Dáil does. We cannot also participate, or senators cannot participate in numerous committees in the House, as well as the procedures don't allow for it. The business of government in general is primarily conducted in Dáil Éireann. In fact, the introduction of any bill that places a charge on the Exchequer must be initiated in Dáil Éireann, which again mutes most of the legislation that can come out of the Seanad in the first place. So if we're not producing legislation, what exactly is our purpose? The final point I would make is that by being a TD, you have a mandate from the people that elected you. That can mean several thousand people who voted for you. If you're a senator, you don't necessarily have that particular mandate. I don't understand how somebody who could be a party leader could not be a TD, given that the Senate is a very limited voice. In fact, I actually voted to abolish it. So I'll conclude on that, but please vote against this motion. I think it would damage the party. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Now, delegates, it's 16:29, and we're to finish at 16:30. So there's no point in inviting anyone else to speak, because that would mean I couldn't use the last minute to say a few things that I want to say. And what I want to say is this, and take careful account, please, delegates, of what I'm saying. We're due to assemble at 10:30 in the morning, and I presume some of you will insist on participating in the festivities this evening. And as it's laid out in standing orders at the moment, we will be taking these motions first in the morning at 10:30. And these are quite crucial motions. In particular, motion 79 and the amendment may well determine electoral strategy. And we cannot allow ourselves to be in the situation of deciding on those motions with a handful of delegates in the room. So the point I'm making is if you want a say in the electoral strategy that we're going to be following in the next election, please be here at 10:30 in the morning, because it may well be decided by 11:25. So with that, I'm going to adjourn this session now. Point of order. I take a point of order, but we're out of time even for taking points of order. But go ahead, Sean.
Chair, could I just propose that an exception be made and that the votes on those motions could be taken now?
That's not
we
a
could
point.
proceed with the other motions in the morning.
Sean, that's not a point of order. That's a proposal which it's not open to me to take, given that the time has expired that was allowed in standing orders. So I'm going to have to adjourn. It's no problem, because given that I've alerted you to it, you will all be here at 10:30 in the morning. Thank you, delegates. See you at see you later at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock sharp. Thank you, delegates.